So it is now 11:30, and we're going to go ahead and get started to make sure that we are monitoring everyone's time. My name is Kenya Wilson, and I am the current Emerging Professionals Director for Fort Worth HR. I would like to welcome you today to the first session of our A Day in the Life career series, which will be covering different functional areas in HR. Today, we are starting off with a day in the life of a chief people officer. And so we want to thank you all again for attending, and I am sure that this session will be of great value to you. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that we go over a few logistics. You should be able to we should be able to use the chat function if you have any questions. If you, in the chat, you can go ahead and post those for the host, and we will be monitoring the chat as well. You can also raise your hand as the host has indicated, or the presenter has indicated that she will be comfortable taking questions throughout. So if you need to raise your hand or enter questions in the chat, please do so. Please make sure to keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking, especially while the speaker has the floor. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker. Holly Novak, who is the Chief People Officer for Jack Henry and Associates, is joining us today to talk about her journey as a Chief People Officer. She has over 20 years of experience in HR. In those positions include Senior Manager, HR Operations, Senior Manager, HR Business Partner, Recruiter, and HRIS Manager. And she's been with Jack Henry since 2018. Her expertise focuses around people analytics, communication, performance management, compliance, and HR technology. She received her business management degree and MBA from Texas Tech University and is an active member of the Society of Human Resources Management, or SHRM, both in Texas and nationally, serving as an assistant director for Texas SHRM. She lives in North Texas with her husband, Todd, and two daughters, Riley and Tegan. And we are definitely pleased to have you with us today. I'm sure you all are in for a treat. So be sure to engage in the session and stay for a little bit for additional announcements from Fort Worth HR. Welcome to you, Holly.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you see my screen as well? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'd love to just start off our time together and just learn a little bit about you all so that I can kind of talk through some things with you and just kind of get a feel of the room. So let's just test it. If you can just send a chat over and say who you are, maybe where you work for, what your title is, and just anything about yourself that you want to share. So I'd love to see some responses in the chat. I can't see any right now, but hopefully we'll see some in just a second. Kenya, if you happen to.
Yes, so in the chat option, I believe for you, since you are a presenter, I think you should be able to, under the to option in the chat, change it to everyone. Is that the case?
I can't, but maybe if people start responding, I'll be able to see the messages at least.
Okay. So let me see if I can change your role and see if that works. Are you able to switch it now?
Yes. Okay, I can.
Okay, great.
Sounds great. Has anybody responded though that you can see, or is it
Let me go back to everyone. And so we have people who have raised their hands. Let's see. I think people are raising their hands. I'm not seeing.
If y'all can stick it in the chat, you can also just, I don't know if you can talk or not, but if you want to stick it in the chat, we can go that way.
Yeah. I am looking.
And we can just skip this altogether, but it would be still nice to understand who's in the room.
I know.
We can come back to it.
I don't see any.
Maybe they don't have the ability.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mary. Mary, are you trying to tell us something? Mary Evans?
Yes, I'm sorry. It says the chat is disabled. That's why none of us can go in there.
Okay.
Everybody's like, I'm trying, but it won't.
Yes.
Let me work on that, but go ahead, Mary, and
we'll
we
go
can
ahead
do
and
a few introductions, maybe, if you have time. Okay.
we'll go ahead and get started, and maybe we can turn on the chat and in just a second, and we'll make that happen. That sounds good. Okay. Well, lovely to see you all. Sorry for that little bit of technical difficulty, everyone. I'm super happy to chat with you, and maybe we can, if we get the text open, then maybe we can see some responses about who everybody is. But I'm going to start off and just chat a little bit about me and where I'm from. So I am from a super small town in the Texas Panhandle called McLean, Texas. It's about 800 people. Okay, great. Now it's working. So as I talk about me for a second, everybody else put in the chat who you are, what company you work for, what your title is, and just we'll keep it open to throughout the time so we can do some questions as well. So super small town, McLean, Texas, 800 people. So I grew up there from the majority of my life. My parents still live there. My brother still lives there. So that's where I am from. I went to Texas Tech University. I went to Texas Tech to get my undergrad. And then a few years later, I graduated with my master's of business administration from Tech as well. So I took a little break in between there. And then they have an executive MBA program that I did when I was already working. I'm going to talk about my career journey a little bit more in just a second, so I'm going to skip over that for right now. I'm a huge supporter and part of Texas SHRM. So Texas SHRM, if you're not aware, is made up of all of the presidents and president-elects from all of the different, about 40 chapters in Texas. And so they get together on a quarterly basis. I'm part of the board of Texas SHRM. So I run all of what they call the core leadership areas. So helping the chapters throughout Texas, like things on membership and certification and legal and legislative and that sort of thing. And so that's my role at Texas SHRM. I've been involved with them since about 2012, maybe, I guess, when I was the head of the Panhandle SHRM when I lived in Amarillo. I'm a huge podcast fan. So I like to listen to all kinds of podcasts, whether they are work related or not work related. There's some of my favorites on there. I have new favorites all the time, but my favorite work ones are Josh Burson. If you don't know of him, I'm a total nerd, I'm a little bit of a data geek. And so he is phenomenal around all kinds of research, that sort of thing. Patrick Lencioni, he has a great podcast as well. Work Life, that's Adam Grant. And then Talent Angle is the Gartner podcast that's really more focused on talent retention, analytics, that sort of thing. And then some of my favorite non-work, Buried Bones and Tenfold More Wicked. I have lots of other ones, but they're mostly like true crime podcasts. And so that's what I do when I need a brain break from my work life. And then let's see, that's my family. And so we had my oldest daughter just graduated high school. There's my younger daughter, she's 16. So we have two teenagers in the house, busy, super busy all the time. There's my two very silly dogs. If you hear them barking, I apologize in advance, but they are super fun as well. And then my word for the 2023 is balance. And so as we're going through a lot of life changes around my daughter graduating, going off to college, and then I have a pretty busy job at work as well, and just all the things in between, I chose balance as my word for the year, to just make sure that I'm balancing my health and my well-being and mental wellness and all of that with all the other things that are going on in my life. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm going to walk through my career journey, but I'm going to take a pause and look through some of the responses from you all. So we have lots of people from all over the DFW area. So lovely to meet all of you. I'd love to utilize the chat as we're walking through. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them as we go through. So it looks like we have several HR managers, some interns. Very good. Very, very good. Some students. Awesome. Some HRBPs. Okay, lovely to meet you all. All right, so I'm going to go through my career journey, which, as you all know, many people say they end up in HR on accident. I think that is a very common thing to happen with us HR folks. And so I actually began my career in college. I worked for the Federal Aviation Administration. And I worked for what they call the FISBO in Lubbock, Texas, because I went to Texas Tech. And during that job, I found a really strong mentor, and she wasn't an HR person necessarily, but she was their people operations person. And so she really taught me a lot about how to put people first, and she was a really strong mentor. I still talk to her to this day, and that was a really long time ago, about 25 years ago. And so she was a really strong mentor for me. So that's where I think I first kind of got my start in thinking about technology and people, and what that means and how I want to get involved. So from there, I had my first HR director role, which was really just like kind of an HR manager, from one of our clients at the FAA. Well, not clients, I guess. It was an aircraft painting company in the Amarillo area. And so I started there. That was a very eye-opening experience, a little bit of a disaster, but I learned a ton during that very brief experience. And they got hit by ice later, so I was really glad that I got out of there. But it was a very big learning experience that I went through for about 2 years there. And then I went to recruiting. So I started recruiting, which I know many HR people start out in recruiting. So I started doing that for Robert Half in the Lubbock and Amarillo area. We actually helped them start their office in Amarillo and in Lubbock. So I did that for about 3 years, and it was also very eye-opening. I always say that one year in recruiting equals about 3 in normal life, because it's so stressful, and you are constantly moving all the time. And then from there, I began working at a nonprofit. So there is a huge nonprofit, well, huge, it's not huge, about 500 employees in the Amarillo area called Cal Farley's Boys Ranch. So I started there as an HR specialist in 2003, also the year I got married. And so from there, I worked there for about 12 years. So I spent all 12 years there in kind of some different areas. I started as that HR specialist, moved up a little bit there, and then I moved to an HRIS manager. And then I actually left the human resources side for a while and went over and started working for the operations side as the operations director, which was really good for me because I was able to see the other side of kind of what employees are looking for, and just how policy changes that we do on the human resource side sometimes can impact in ways that we don't realize. And so it was really nice for me to be on the operations side and kind of understand that world. And then I slipped back over to VP of HR from that role that I was in for a few years. And so then I was in the senior VP of HR role at Cal Farley's for about 5 years. And then from there, I took a sidestep and we relocated from the Panhandle to the Houston area. And I worked for an HR software company as their head of HR consulting and also HR implementation. And I did that for about 3.5 years. And so it was really interesting for me. It was a very technical role on the implementation side. The HR consulting side was, of course, the stuff that I already knew I loved to do. But I learned a ton about just kind of implementation and software and what to do and what not to do. And so that was a very eye-opening experience for me, which I think was a really nice step into my world here at Jack Henry. So I started at Jack Henry in 2018 as an HR business partner manager. And then I moved into a senior manager role and kind of did the HRBP function for all of the functions of Jack Henry. So sales, marketing, tech services, that sort of thing. And then I moved to HR operations. We actually did not have an HR operations function at Jack Henry. We have about 7,100 employees right now. So pretty large. And we needed the HR operations team to make sure that the different centers of excellence in HR, like talent development and payroll and benefits, total rewards, compensation, HRBP, all of those were kind of talking well to each other, talent acquisition. And so we developed the HR operations function, and I became the head of HR operations. And then from then I transferred into the chief people officer role. So kind of a long story to kind of navigate through, but I've been in my chief people officer role now for about 1.5 years, a little over 1.5 years. In October is when I got the role. So I'd like to kind of talk through, and as we go through, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have as we kind of pop through them, but I'd like to talk through some lessons that I've learned along the way, just to kind of give you a sense. And of course, there's so many other lessons that I'm still learning on a daily basis. I try to learn something new every day, which usually happens. But one of the biggest things is to be a good listener. So truly talk less and hear the people around you. And I know a lot of times, especially in an executive role, you're in a different kind of world with all the different executives. But even in any sort of role, whether you're a leader or not a leader, I think taking the time to be intentional about what you say and do more listening for the most part is always very, very wise. And then leading with empathy and grace. I know that especially through the past couple of years, we've had to deal with a lot of just grief and hardship and just hard things in life through the COVID years. And so I think making sure that we're leading with our people, with our encouraging our managers to lead with grace and empathy is super important. And so I think that is a huge lesson I learned along the way. And then just be curious. And so as you're listening, think of good questions. I know a lot of times, and I do this too, but we're thinking of what we're going to say next instead of really listening and then trying to think of good questions to ask people. One of my favorite books is The Question Behind the Question. And so thinking of just super good questions to sit and enumerate on before you speak is really important. Figure out how to get comfortable with conflict. So in this role, it's interesting to go along the different levels of the human resource world. And so you have conflict at every one of those levels, right? So even when you're an individual contributor in an HR role or any role, honestly, you deal with conflict in a different level. And then as you're like an HR business partner, of course, you're working with the leaders and with the employees and kind of working through that. But every single role, especially the client facing HR roles. Now, maybe not so much with payroll and benefits, that sort of thing, but anytime that you're working with employees and working with leaders, you're going to have to get comfortable with the conflict and help them navigate through that as they talk with their people. So that's super important to figure out. And then constantly evaluate your employee experience. One of the biggest things that we talk about a ton at Jack Henry is just our overall employee experience. So as we're making decisions, as we're thinking through what we're doing, even like, our annual increases, that sort of thing, like as we're making those decisions, how are your employees going to see that? And so take a step back from where you are. A lot of times we get so stuck in the human resource world that we only think in that mindset. And so pull yourself out of that tunnel and think, if I was just a normal individual contributor coming to work every day, how would I take this decision? And then try to talk with them in a way that you can help them to understand the why behind the decisions that we make. That is super important. And we're learning even more as we're getting to more of a remote posture and people like crave flexibility and that work-life balance. So helping make sure that you understand what people truly want and how does that align with your culture and your values, and then seek ways to make sure that you're good there. And then this job is hard. And so you got to bring your energy on a daily basis, even when you don't feel it. And I think that's true for any level of the HR world, but especially at the CPO level, CHRO level, even HR manager level, is just making sure that you are kind of the constant source of energy and maybe not like cheerleader all the time, but at least that confidence and calmness is super important all the time in this role. And then, and by the way, I haven't mastered any of these things. These are just things that I'm continuously still working on. Don't be afraid to share yourself and get vulnerable when needed. So take the time to really get to know your people and your peers and your leaders and figure out how you can support them in the best way possible. And so sometimes that means that you're a little more vulnerable, sharing a little bit more about yourself and how you navigate through things so that you can help other people along the way. And then finally, understand what your values are and then live them. And so take some time to really do some self-reflection on what is it that's most important to you as a person and as a leader and as an employee. And then take the time to just make sure that all of your words and communications and experience is based on those values and that you're living them. Okay, I do have one question over here. You mentioned that recruiting is incredibly stressful. With that being said, would you recommend starting out? I think that there's so many different aspects of human resources. You have to figure out, like, what are you passionate about? Recruiting is selling, right? And so you're basically selling a job and selling an idea or selling a company. And so if you're not comfortable in that space and having conversations and really being passionate about selling something to another person, then maybe recruiting is not the right thing for you. If you are, I think it is a little stressful. And the reason it's stressful is because of the human aspect, right? Because you can work so hard and place somebody at a company and then they don't show up, and that's super stressful. And so I think that it's worth it if that is something that you're passionate about and that you love doing. Whenever I talk to somebody that's getting into the human resource field, I always take the time to say, hey, think about what it is that you love. So if you love numbers, then maybe compensation is the right place for you, or maybe a benefits role because they still kind of work with the numbers and the compensation side too, or payroll. Or if you love recruiting, talking to people, selling, of course, that would be the thing for you. But if you love just like the caring for people and that aspect, an HR business partner might be the right role for you, or talent development. If you love standing up and talking to people and training them, then talent development might be the best role. So just trying to determine where are you passionate and then get there. A lot of times you have to start in recruiting because that's your first step in, and then you can get into a company and kind of look around and decide, oh, hey, this looks more interesting and I'll flop over there, which is fine. I think that's totally fine. I don't know if I answered that question, Eve, but let me know if I did. Any other questions right now? You can, I can unmute you or you can stick them in the chat.
Holly, I do have a quick question, and it's one that I get commonly from students and those seeking careers in HR. It's regarding certifications. So is there one certification that's more valuable than others? And is there one that leans more towards success for senior roles like a CPO than the other? So SHRM versus HRCI, who's the winner if there is one?
That's such a hard, it's a hard answer because it really doesn't matter. To me, my personal opinion is get a certification, whether you get the HRCI or the SHRM. For those of you that aren't aware, SHRM and HRCI used to be one thing. So HRCI was a part of SHRM and they got a little divorce about, oh gosh, I don't know, 7 years ago, 6 years ago. And so now that's why we have two different certifications. So I would say they're both valuable. When I look even at postings or when we post, we just say HR certification. We don't specify SHRM or HRCI. HRCI is a little harder. The pass rate's a little bit lower. SHRM is focused more on their the different competencies. So it's a little bit different test than HRCI is more focused on like definitions and like legal cases and that sort of thing. And so you really just kind of have to determine which one you want to go for. Honestly, there's more classes out there and more resources for the SHRM test that I've seen lately. And so most of my employees that are getting certified right now are getting SHRM, but I do not align necessarily either way with either. I have both. That's just because I was grandfathered into the SHRM world because I got my PHR in 2003, which may be before some of you were born. I'm not sure, but it's been a long time. So did that answer your question, Kenya?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Cool. Any other questions right now? Let's see. Here's one. What has been the most challenging issue, concern, thing you have learned that has been something you take with you? I would say the most challenging or thing that I've learned along the way is really to just meet people where they are. Like you just have to realize that everybody is doing the best they can. And so a lot of times, especially in HR, we're like, why can't you just read the email? Or like that sort of thing. And I think it's just taking the time back to say, hey, let me look at it through your lens, and how can we make sure that we're doing the best to support you? And that takes a while, and it probably shouldn't take that long, but it took me a little bit. And so making sure that you just stop and say, hey, what's the best way that I can support the biggest number of people? And how can I see it through your lens? And so that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned throughout the years. Yeah. Yes, and I will say most all chapters have a certification course, so highly recommend you taking that. How do you connect the bridges between departments and leadership and with leadership? Okay, so I would say the biggest thing is your business acumen, and so I'm gonna take that question to move to my next slide. So this is not from me, this is from Gartner. This gives you a really good tool on what now. I will say that hardly any CHRO that I know is really competent and excellent at every single one of these things. But this is what I utilize to kind of strive for, like, hey, when I'm struggling with this, what maybe classes do I need to take, or resources or white papers do I need to read to try to get better? But to answer your question, I think the foundation that you need is business acumen. And so if you see there, so that bottom foundation there is the functional business leader. And then you see right above that is the business acumen piece, and then the business strategy development. So those things are kind of what you have to have in general. If you want to get to a CHRO role or a CPO role, you have to build your leadership ability first, and then you have to have the intentional focus on business acumen. So once you have that, then you can talk with those departments, you can talk with those leaders in a way that they understand. And so to do that is, of course, in every company, you have to learn the business, you have to learn the company. And so really understanding what are their pain points, what is it that we can truly support them in. If you don't take the time to learn that, then you're not going to be valuable to them. And so doing that is super important. And then that's what will bridge your relationship with those departments and those leaders over time. Does that make sense, Megan? Did I answer your question? Okay, awesome. So I want to walk through this a little bit with you. I know it's a lot, but I just think it's a really good way of kind of walking through, like, what is it that makes a great, and I'm not saying that I'm a great CPO, I'm just giving you examples on what Gartner, at least the world says, makes a great CHRO. And so one of them is like understanding everything that you're going to have to be doing in this role. And so first off, you have to be able to communicate and be a really good coach and leader with the board and the CEO. So for me, my C-suite, right, is CEO, my COO, and then the board and the CFO. So all the C's, right? And then of course the board. And so making sure that you are really taking the time to work through succession planning with them, to truly be seen as a trusted partner with those people in those roles, so which are my peers, right? And then making sure that you understand and have a good knowledge of executive compensation. That was one of the biggest things in my role as CPO that I did not know before I came into the role, was really the details and the ins and outs of executive comp, because it's complicated and there's a lot to it that you have to learn. And so that was one of the huge things, a little bit of a learning curve that I went through when I first got my role. And then you have to understand your culture and then drive that culture and purpose throughout your organization. So making sure that you're just truly focused on understanding, number one, what is your culture? Because really kind of you're the culture keeper, right, in a CHRO or CPO role. And so you got to understand it first and then help drive it. And then, of course, with the talent, so making sure that you understand what your top talent is, like what positions are hardest to recruit for, how do you understand what that means and what that looks like, and make sure you're embedding the DI aspect into that. So do you have the right data? Do you have the right metrics as a leader, so that you can understand what that looks like and share that with your peers? And then the employee value proposition is huge. So I talked about employee experience before, and that all ties to why do people want to come work for you? So what is the value that your company brings, and why should somebody want to work for you? That's what an employee value proposition is. So if you don't have that displayed, I'm happy to give you an example of that if you want to reach out to me. But like displayed somehow to say, hey, here's all the reasons that you would want to come and work for us, and that be able to speak to that very clearly to your board and to your leaders and to your people on a regular basis is super important. And then just making sure that you're able to drive change on a strategic level. And so everything that we do, right? And so I told you our company has about 7,100 employees. So every decision that I make impacts all of those, well, every big decision, I guess, impacts all of those 7,100 people, and not just them, but their families. And so you could double that or triple it, just thinking through everybody that you might impact. And so as you're making big changes, even like adding a benefit or taking it away, understanding what is that going to do to your people and how are you going to navigate through that is really important. So taking the time to slow down, which I think one of the biggest things that HR people have a hard time with sometimes is slowing down enough to think through, like, how do we make sure that we have steps in place and communication in place before we make a big change? And so those are all the things, like kind of understanding change. And then that next one is really just the stakeholder piece of it, right? So you have to understand what external things are happening that impact us. And then what does your board want to see? Because they're all external too, right? So what does your board want to see that that you can share with them related to the people aspect, and making sure that we truly keep our people first in all of our decisions? That's one thing that we really focus on. And so as you're thinking through who are your stakeholders, if you're a publicly traded company, then that looks totally different than if you're a private or a nonprofit. And so trying to understand first who are your stakeholders and what does that look like, and then how do you support them in the best way possible. And then finally, I already talked about this a lot, but making sure that you're truly a trusted advisor and coach. And that takes some time. It takes relationship building and all of those things. And so you can start that now and be a trusted advisor, whatever level you are, to your peers and to the people that you support. And then as you get into the higher levels, if you want to be a CHRO, that is something that you really have to take the time to nurture those relationships and spend time with your peers and develop that relationship along the way. And then, of course, the top, all that drives business results. So any thoughts or questions related to, I know that's a lot of information all at one time, but any thoughts or questions related to this? I hope that was helpful. And then I wanted to kind of finish off with just what we're focused on as an HR team right now. So I have, I kind of mentioned our team. So our current people and culture team, we call ourselves people and culture instead of HR. All of our team is, I kind of mentioned our different centers. We call them centers of expertise. So we have the HR business partners, we have HR operations, we have talent acquisition, we have leadership development, and talent development, which is the training aspect. And then we have compensation. And then we have our DEI team. And then I have a strategy person that reports to me too. So, and then we actually also have our people technology area as well. So all of those things is kind of, we have about 72 people on our HR team. And so this is our main focus, what we have on the screen here for the next 6 months. And so we're focused on technology, making sure that we have the technology in place to support our people in the best way possible. And that experience, I talked about that a lot, our associate experience, and really putting that front. And we're also focused a lot on our branding, employer branding as a company. We're focused a lot on pay equity and really building the foundation of pay. We're going through a huge job architecture project right now, and kind of laying the foundation for our job structure and architecture, and then we'll align from there. And then org design, that's kind of part of that job architecture that we're working on. We're beginning with our engineering team because that's the hardest thing for us to find and the biggest area that we need to work on. And then, of course, the talent intelligence piece, making sure that we have the valuable metrics available to our leaders. And then all of that is in the lens of our DEIB. So everything that we do, we don't necessarily have DEI as a separate program. We utilize it as a lens that we look through. So in our world, we say diversity plus equity plus inclusion equals belonging. And so that's how we kind of look through all the lenses. All right, so I have some questions over here. You can also raise your hand. I think, let me make sure that I have the participants up. Yeah, okay, so you can also raise your hand if you would like. What are the top 3 to 5 analytics that you review on a regular basis? Okay, so analytics are hard because you probably have a bajillion of them and you have to focus on what is most important. Right now, we're kind of in the process of figuring that out. We have this huge dashboard that we look at. I would say for right now, we look at our talent metrics, so time to fill, that sort of thing is a big one. We look at turnover still because that really kind of impacts the bottom line when you're thinking through turnover, and then do we replace them? Do we not? Being super intentional about that. We also look at just our overall headcount. Right now, we're really focused on how many people are remote, how many people are hybrid, and how many people are in the office, and trying to determine, because we're thinking through a lot of facilities things right now. So I will say, on a regular basis, we have a dashboard that has basic demographics, like what's our age, generations of people, and when do people leave? Like have they been here 0 to 1 years or 3 to 5 years? And like the most people are leaving in 1 to 3 years, then how do we focus more on the experience for those people so that we can keep them? And so everything that we look at is really based on what metrics do we look at so we can determine how do we retain people. So those are the kind of the biggest ones that we look at. But as a problem comes up, right, then you have to look at your metrics related to that problem to really understand it. So hopefully that's helpful. How does a large company typically need? How large does a company need to be to justify having a CHRO? Good question. So I think that depends a lot on the leadership of the company. And as you all know, we have 30-ish people here. So different companies put different things first as far as a priority goes. And so if you have a company that is truly people first, I think that they're going to understand the need to have a CHRO more than maybe a company that is not people first. And so I would say I've seen CHROs at a company as small as 50. I have seen no CHRO at a company as big as 2,000. And so just trying to determine like, what is it that are your major priorities? And then how do you kind of determine that? You'll see in smaller companies, a lot of times you'll have an HR director or an HR manager, and that's as far as they'll go. It's really a matter of how strategic does your company want to be, and do your leaders want to be? And then how much do they care about adding the people strategy to that? Because your CHRO should be your people strategy person. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Do you feel it has helped the dynamic and how employees view or work within your department by changing it from HR? Yeah, I think so. So we still get we got to ask HR over and over, but I think really helping people see that we are truly people and culture. So the chief people officer title was there before me. My predecessor had that title. And so I think that title helped kind of push us to focusing on the people and culture aspect more than human resources. And we're still in the process of it. So people still call us HR, but I think our team specifically is really focused on, hey, let's push us to the next level of moving towards truly what we are, right, is the people and culture group. Oh, performance management. What are your thoughts on performance management? Oh man, what a question. I think performance management is super painful, and it's a means to an end in a lot of companies. It's a big process to change it. At my last company, the nonprofit that I worked at, we did actually move from a scoring system to we're really focused on you pick these key goals, and that's what we focus on. So we didn't score at all. I know that's really controversial. I would say that anything that you do related to performance management has to be meaningful. So what we did at Jack Henry is, it's been about 5 years now. We actually had our leadership development cohort, so about 30 people. They developed our performance review system. And they were made up of leaders from all throughout the organization. And that is what we use to this day. So we built it in-house. And so I think that anytime that you can get your leaders from all the different areas involved in decision making around what does your performance management system look like, that is going to be your best bet always. So that you can truly understand, like, what do people truly care about and how do we measure that? And so that's what we did. And I think it's working pretty well. Overall, I think performance management is still hard. It's still a task that leaders have to do, that they see as a task a lot of times. But my biggest thing is tie performance to pay increases. So figure out a way to tie that, so you have the performance-based management related to your pay. So. Oh, and we do make it a continuous discussion. So ideally, managers will have conversations with their people on a quarterly basis. We call those check-ins, and then they have their weekly one-on-ones. And so we encourage all of that. So it is truly continuous. So you're not doing just a one time a year conversation. Hope that helps, Philip. All right. Anything else? That's all I have for you as far as slides go. So I just have this question slide. Anything else? Any other questions? Anything from you, Kenya?
No, so I am just going to see if we have any additional questions, but while we are waiting for other questions, I did want to, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to kind of speak to those who are interested in HR and in careers transition. This is important knowledge for us to be able to pass on to our community. And so thank you so much, Holly, for being here with us. Also, to all of our attendees, I kind of want to make you aware of some things that Fort Worth HR has going on. If you're not familiar with who we are, Fort Worth HR is Tarrant County and the surrounding areas affiliate for SHRM. And we participate in activities of Texas SHRM and our other SHRM affiliated chapters in North Texas. And so the mission for the organization is to promote the value of HR, develop skills and knowledges of their members through things like this and our certification prep courses, and also facilitate the development of professional relationships through networking. If you are not a member, we definitely encourage you to join. If you are a student, then we encourage you to join at a discounted rate. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us and let us know, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. There are a few things that we have coming up. This career series will continue throughout the month of July, with a break on the 27th for our July legal update and luncheon. So feel free to register for that at FWHR.org. Register for our July legal update and luncheon and the rest of our career series. And that will wrap up on August 3rd. Our next session is going to be next week on the 13th, which covers the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So feel free to join that session. We also have upcoming, outside of the series, in our legal update and luncheon in July on the 27th. On August the 4th, we have a session partnering with TCC Alliance that is going to cover empowering non-HR professionals. And so the purpose of that workshop is to provide a comprehensive introduction to HR basics for those who may not be working in an HR role. And so the topics covered in that session will be employment law 101, hiring and onboarding, people and performance management, and conducting ethical and lawful terminations. For individual registration, the fee is $50, and for Fort Worth HR members and Alliance members, the registration is $30, and a code will be provided. But if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of our board members, and you can find information about those sessions on LinkedIn as well. I think that
we
is
do have a couple other questions.
okay. Great.
Yeah. Okay, so one of them was, thoughts on AI. I'm surprised that somebody asked this sooner. I am fascinated by AI. I think that there is a lot of stuff that we still need to learn and what the impact is truly going to be, not just on HR, but right in general. I think from right now, AI is a great tool for us in the people and culture space to utilize as we're developing things. And so things like job descriptions and communications, utilizing it for that. For as technology advances more on the AI space, I think just really doing due diligence and understanding what the benefits of AI are as you're looking like at your HCM and your HRS systems, that sort of thing is going to be super interesting. I utilize ChatGPT specifically for like when I send out communications, or if I need some help thinking through wording on something, I'll utilize it for that. ChatGPT in the workplace, I think, is tricky. So especially we're a technology company, right? And so we have to put at least some boundaries in place on what can be utilized through that and what cannot be. And so we use our risk and kind of cyber risk people to help us put some wording around that. But I think there's definitely some risk included in letting your employees use ChatGPT in the workplace, especially if you have like engineers, programmers, that sort of thing, because we don't want data being shared out in the world. And so I think definitely make sure that you're thinking through all of your risks before you allow just open ChatGPT in your workplace. But I am not a lawyer or a risk expert. And so I'm sure there's some other opinions on that as well. But I do use it some. And then advice. I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I would give anybody is to understand all the different scopes of human resources before you just dive into one area, and like make sure that you find your passion, because you don't want to be stuck in like a comp role when you're really passionate about helping people on the employee relations side or the HR business partner side. And so really just taking some time to understand truly all the different aspects, and then understand the business acumen piece. I would say more than anything, like make sure you take the time personally to do your due diligence and your homework on learning the business acumen side, so you could truly understand the business as you're going through your career. That would be my biggest advice. I think that's all, Kenya.
Okay, great. That is all that I see. Again, thank you so much for attending, everyone, and thank you, Holly, for sharing your time with us today. This session will be recorded. And so if you need to go back and refer to anything that was covered today, you'll be able to find that on the Fort Worth HR website under Emerging Professional and under Career Series. So please be sure to check that out. And I hope to see you all in future sessions. If you have any questions for us, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, all.
Thank you.